Guessing where a pro player is going to place in FNCS is an almost impossible task. There's just so many factors that go into where they're finally going to end up on the leaderboard. Whether they get contested off spawn, whether they choke on day 2, whether they have good enough surge strats prepared. There's so many different things affecting their placement, and it makes predicting an FNCS winner almost impossible, even if you're just picking Peterborough every single season. So in this video, I'm going to set myself the very hard task of choosing every single region's FNCS winner, as well as who has got top 3/winning potential in upcoming seasons. I'm also going to be locking in my top 5 as well as my top 10 predictions on NA Central and EU, and letting you guys know who I think is actually the best trio. I put so much effort into researching this video, watching loads of odds, figuring out where these guys might actually end up. And if you guys have any disagreements or you have any suggestions, let me know down in the comments. But let's just get straight into this with player number 1. To start things off with a bang, let's get straight into one of the biggest teams on this list that just won the very first tournament of Chapter 6, which is of course Clix, Muzz and Rise. And for these guys, it's quite difficult to place them. Obviously Clix has never won an FNCS, neither has Rise. However, Muzz is a 3x FNCS winner, and these guys have a lot of potential, shown by the fact they've already won a tournament so far. I watched a bunch of their games from the actual tournament they won of the FNCS trials, and I was very impressed by what I saw. How there still seems there's a lot of synergy problems, as well as just not understanding the meta fully, which I'm sure they'll fix over time. The other big thing that's preventing me from putting them into that top 3 or winning potential category at the top is also the fact that they're just not at the best spot. Warriors Watch is definitely good and it has good surge options, but it's just not one of the best spots, and normally your spot dictates how well you do in grands, no matter how good of a player you are. So for these guys, I'm going to go ahead and stick them into the top 5. However, I know a lot of you guys think they're going to be higher up, but I'm just saving some spots for some of the other pro teams that we've got. Now let's swap over to EU and take a look at a trio that I think has FNCS winning potential, and they're probably likely to just win one FNCS throughout this year and potentially even the upcoming global LAN as well, which is Cammy, Seti and Cherry. One of the biggest things that Cammy and Seti lacked in the past year of duos, where they kind of underperformed, for being completely honest, not up to their typical standards of, winning and top 5ing every FNCS. They had a pretty bad year by their standards, was a lack of firepower, and I think Cherry really fills that gap very well. He is an absolutely insane fragger, he knows how to get killed, and these guys are the absolute masters of mid-ground. The one thing I will say is that height is just so strong in the current meta, and it's very, very crucial that you go for height in certain games. I don't think these guys have the potential to be winning a lot of games from height, especially in a Grands lobby, when we take a look at some of the other players that we've got on this list over on EU. However, I still think that in the current meta, these guys have a high chance of getting top 3 and definitely winning potential throughout this year. So I'm going to whack them straight into our second tier. Now, swapping back to NA, I've got another team that I think can go into that top 3 slot of this upcoming FNCS, and it's definitely one of the best trios in the world, which is Canada, Acorn and Aegis. Canada and Aegis have already played and won an FNCS together in the past back in duos, and of course Acorn, who's joined them, is one of the best IGLs in the world. The one thing I will say, and the reason I'm not putting these guys higher, is there was that massive reshuffling of the trios where loads of people were getting dropped and there was like a lot of glazing and stuff going on with Peterborough, but they were trying to play with him. It just doesn't look like they came out on top in terms of that trade. Not saying Aegis is a bad player, definitely not. I'm just saying they don't have that winning potential that the people at the very top of this list in a second do have. Their off-spawn isn't as good, their mid-game fighting synergy isn't as good. Acorn oftentimes is, on a completely different page to the other two who are kind of used to playing duos together, and it doesn't really seem like they're meshing just as well as they should be if they want to be winning FNCS in the upcoming season. The reason I'm putting them in top 3 though is I see them winning an FNCS later on down this year 100%. Now, swapping back to EU and zooming in on Germany, we have of course got Reason, Noah Riley and Janice. I know Noah's not from Germany, but you guys get my point. And for these guys, I'm just going to go ahead and put them straight into top 5. I definitely think there is some potential for them to do better than that throughout the year, but just based on what I've seen throughout OG, where they were doing fairly good in cash cups and then they get griefed because they're streaming the whole time, that definitely can happen in FNCS Grands, as well as just how well they performed in the very first cup. Like, their understanding of the meta already doesn't seem to be the best compared to the other teams that I've got down below. Also, another thing is their drop spot just isn't as good. They're landing at Masked Meadows, which genuinely isn't the best POA. It's kind of like a top 10, top 5 POA. It's not one of the best ones, as well as these guys just seem like they're not on top of it in terms of grinding. They're definitely playing the game a lot. However, they're not sitting there playing customs non-stop, working with a coach non-stop from what I can see so far. Maybe they'll change, maybe they'll go ahead and prove me wrong. However, I'm going to put these guys into top 5. There still is a lot of potential with them though. Okay, sticking with EU for another second hit, let's go ahead and rank the big trio that I've not covered so far, which is of course Mr. Savage, Mongrel and their brand new third, Panzer. And I actually just did a full video and a full stream where I just watched these guys. I watched every single one of their game from the FNCS trial that they actually won, as well as these guys were the first team to earn in Chapter 6. They definitely are already popping off. However, can they maintain that momentum going into the rest of the year? And that is sort of the big question mark that I'm going to try to answer. The one thing I will say with these guys is they actually seem really, genuinely really solid. I was genuinely impressed. Panzer is like the perfect third for them. They were trying out a bunch of different people, maybe playing with Vidil, maybe playing with Twy. There was a bunch of other players that names were floating around. However, I feel like Panzer is an absolutely godly player that fits into this trio very well. However, I'm not going to put these guys into the top 5. There's just too much competition with like established players that have been, you know, getting top 5, winning FNCS non-stop. So I'm just going to whack them into top 10. That's not to put them down as a trio or say they're bad. There is still potential for them to get top 5. However, just initially, just from watching them, I was very, very impressed. However, not as impressed in terms of, you know, when I watch Queasy play, for example, or when I go ahead and watch Cammy play. That is not the level of impressed. It was more like they just had a really good tournament and they popped off and they're doing very well at the start of the season. Can they maintain that momentum? That's going to be the big question to ask. However, I definitely think they're going to qual grands, and if they don't get contested, like Mr. Savage is always getting contested in the grand finals, there's a very high chance that these guys can get top 10, possibly even top 8, top 7, maybe even top 5 as well. All right, let's stop beating around the bush and go ahead and pick up our first FNCS winner for who we think is going to be at the top of our rankings, which is going to be Epic Well. If you guys don't know, they just added back West, and it's actually a really small region. There's not that many trios on it. And Epic Well, going back to his home region where he's won 6 FNCSs in the past, a bunch of those being in trios with Jukes, who's obviously an insane fighter, as well as a really upcoming GOAT who's on 0 ping as well. Like, I have no idea how to say his name, but he looks very good as well from what I've seen so far. I think these guys are a certain lock to be winning the first FNCS, especially on a much smaller region of NA West, which I've put them in our first slot. All right, now moving from a 6 times FNCS winner to a 5 times FNCS winner with Tayson. And Tayson, if you guys didn't know, struggled a lot in the past year. I think his best FNCS placement was 12th in duos, which isn't the best, especially compared to his standards. And he also struggled quite a bit with finding teammates and actually just, you know, syncing with a team. However, he's finally able to find a new trio in the form of Trulex, who just got back-to-back thirds at the Global Championships, as well as iDrop. And iDrop hasn't got the best placements. However, he does have a lot of firepower. He's a very good mechanical player. However, I watched a bunch of these guys' games, and I really can't put them any higher than top 5 and potentially even top 10. I'm actually struggling with where to decide to put them, because even though their surge plan is very good, their mid-game rotates are very good, they just don't have like the ability and the confidence from what I have seen so far to do very well. I'm sure they will prove me wrong and they'll probably get, you know, a top 3 finish at some point throughout this year, maybe another FNCS win. But compared to these other players that I'm be ranking in a second, I can't put these guys any higher without, you know, overfilling the spots. I'm going to put them into the top 10. However, it's likely to be like a 6th, you know, like they're just that good. But I can't put them into these slots based on the teams that we've got down here. All right, now we've got another very difficult decision, which is trying to figure out which one of these EU players down here we're going to go ahead and put into our top 3. And this is one thing I was struggling with for a very long time. There's so many good players down here and we can only have one of them each into the remaining slots. And that's why I'm going to go ahead and put the first team into my top 3, the last top 3 lock-in, which is Teeny, Chicho, and Chap. These guys, the firepower that they have, as well as just the recent placements in all the cash cups that we had in OG, the recent FNCS trial, the eval cups, the amount of firepower that these guys have is absolutely unreal. I will say though, the reason I'm not putting them any higher, not locking them in for an FNCS win, is I think they actually really benefit from working with a coach. There's not many teams I would say that and, you know, say, oh, they need a coach. I think these guys would massively benefit from just somebody, you know, fixing a couple mistakes that they're making, and they would have a high chance of winning FNCS. That's why I'm putting them into the top 3 category. Literally, the firepower that these guys have as a trio is absolutely insane, which is why they're going into the top 3. All right, now we've got a very difficult choice. We've got 3 legends of the EU scene who is, in my opinion, going to be winning FNCS. I'm just talking about this specific season, not the whole year. And in my opinion, even though Queasy has got an insanely good team, he's got Swizzy and Mustache, 2 of the best fighters in the game, and, you know, he's an absolute god on height. Thomas, could he finally win FNCS? And in my opinion, probably not when they're going up against Veno, Flixie, and Vico. These guys are just too good. The firepower that they have is absolutely insane. The ability for all 3 of them to get refreshes, they're all really good at just going for kills and, you know, opening fights as well. However, the key reason I'm not going to lock in Queasy or, you know, maybe Thomas, or even any of these other teams at actually winning FNCS is these guys, especially in the current meta, are going to be going for height non-stop. From what I watched so far in this current season, they have like 8 different ways that they go for height. They have loads of strategies they've been working on with their coach Raz, which is why I'm locking these guys in for an FNCS win. Veno got very annoyed at me when he was playing with clicks. I ranked them and said, oh, they're probably not going to get more than top 5, which is actually what they ended up getting. However, I think this trio, credit where credit's due, these guys are likely to be winning FNCS. I might be wrong. However, just from what I've seen so far, I think these guys are a certain lock to win this FNCS. All right, now on to the big question of who do I think is going to win FNCS on NA this season? And this is actually a very, very tough choice because obviously both of these 2 teams, we've got Peterbot, Ritual, and Cold, who are obviously insanely good. Brand new trio. They haven't really had that much time to practice. I think Ritual is extremely solid and fits this team very well. And then we've also got over here Poyo, Bolts, and Rapid, who are sort of reunited after, you know, a bit of snaking going on, and they're back playing together. And it's actually a very, very tough choice. And I'm going to make the controversial, maybe dark horse pick of putting these guys as the FNCS winners. So let me justify why I think that's the case. So my main reason for picking these guys at first over Peterbot, who I'm going to have locked in for a top 3 and potentially winning FNCS down the line throughout this year, is just their spot seems a little bit better. Peterbot's landing at brutal box cards, which gives them a guaranteed mythic, as well as a lot lot of map control. However, I don't actually think that suits his playstyle. Like, Pete's not really a map control player who sits on a hill. He's more just a player who just runs around and does a lot of stuff for Surge. And the reason I'm putting Bolt, Rapid, and Poyo up top right here is their spot is just arguably a little bit better. They get the 50 charge mask, and now, especially with the Oni mask nerf and along with the Blade nerf, the 50 charge mask is insanely strong to have, as well as the other two are more likely to have a mask because you only need to find 2 regularly masks as well, which is super nice. As well as they just seem like they're just a bit more cohesive from what I've seen so far. I watch a lot of both of these teams' games, and just these guys just seem a little bit more cohesive. They seem like a little bit more on the same page. Some things I've seen people doing is like, you know, they're not exactly sure who should be tarping at certain times. They're getting caught backside. They're getting caught in bad positions. They're not taking height as much as they normally would. However, Bolts and his trio of Foyo and Rapid, these guys have a really set game plan. They're doing it very, very consistently, and they proved it literally the whole of the tail end of Chapter 5. These guys are winning pretty much every single cup and doing extremely well. And they also did pretty well during OG. And I think OG fit their playstyle quite as well. And that's another big thing with, you know, putting Peterbot into top 3 right here, not having him as that like guaranteed pick to win, which I think most people are going to go with, which is still a very good pick, is I don't think the meta suits them quite as well. It really depends on what meta we get in terms of the next seasons and who might reshuffle this round, I think. But I'm going to lock these guys in for my FNCS winners and put Peterbot rather controversially down here into the top 3. They're definitely going to win an FNCS this year. I don't think they're going to win this next upcoming FNCS, in my opinion. All right, now let's go ahead and swap back to EU and decide out of these 2 great players who just got second at the Global Championships, Queasy and Thomas down here, who is likely to be getting into that top 5. So just to recap on EU, we've got Veno winning is my prediction, Cammy and Teeny's teams getting into the top 3, slash also having the potential to win later on down the line. And then we've got Reason as our other top 5 pick. And for these guys, I'm just going to go ahead straight away and put Thomas into the top 10 and then Queasy into the top 5 with his new trio of Mustache and Swizzy. The one reason I'm putting Thomas lower is just from what I've seen, these guys have been struggling a little bit to qualify for events, so they didn't make the eval finals, which should be a pretty easy qual considering it's literally top 33 out of top 200 for a top trio. And also this their off spawn doesn't seem as solid as some of the other teams landing nearby. They're landing brutal box cars. They're obviously very good at going for height. I just don't really see these guys having the potential to get into the top 3 of this FNCS. So my reasoning for putting Queasy into the top 5 over Thomas is I just think his teammates are a little bit better if we're being completely objectively honest. Swizzy is just an insane player. He's a lot of 5 power, and also Mustache is genuinely insanely good as well. He's won loads of FNCSs. He's a really solid trios player. He's got insane aim, like probably one of the best aimers on EU, and that's the reason I'm going to put these guys into top 5. I will say they have been underperforming quite heavily. Queasy did win a cash cup last season during the OG season that we just had, but then he immediately got dropped by Teeny and Chicho, I believe it was, for Teeny up here for a different team, so they're playing with Chap now. So now Queasy's been left, but he's still got really good options in terms of Swizzy and Mustache. And I will say these guys off spawn is very, very good. Seaport City, if they can get it unconned, they're getting conned a little bit at the moment, which isn't really ideal to see if we get conned in grands or not. And also they've just been underperforming a little bit compared to, you know, their standards as players. They haven't been getting any wins recently. They haven't actually been getting any sort of even top 3s in any sort of event, even opens. So that's why I'm a little bit concerned about how well they'll do this season. I definitely do see, I mean, it's Queasy, easily for him to get into the top 3, maybe even win, depending on how much he can fix up. But I'm just going to whack him into the top 5 slot right there, and I think that's a pretty fair ranking. All right, so I've gone ahead and added in a bunch of people that I'm just going to quickly fire off and rank in all of these guys. And the final person I think is going to get into top 5 with their trio is going to be the GOAT Booger, whacking into the top 5 with Threats and Reed. These guys are just really good. I definitely think there's not a chance they can win this FNCS just from what I've seen and watching them play a little bit. However, depending on the meta, depending on what goes on, depending on how much they grind, I definitely think they can, you know, get into the top 3, potentially win FNCS towards the later half of this year. They're obviously all really good players as well. Then, not lucky to make grands, I'm going to go ahead and put Cooper playing with Sphinx and Noxy. These guys also seem pretty good. I'm not going to put them any higher. I saw them get like 1v3 during endgame by Mason, which is kind of crazy. So it's a bit hard to rank a team that you haven't watched that much. However, I think these guys are pretty locked in for a top 10. They seem pretty good as well. Bucky as well. He's playing with Ocus and like an absolute demon, like upcoming control player who seems really, really good. I'm going to put those guys into top 10. Quite a high placement for Bucky considering he doesn't grind the game that much, but I think they are actually capable of getting a top 10. Then swapping back to EU, we've got Andalex and his trio of the Frenchies and Sato and things like that. I'm going to put those guys in top 10 as well. They seem very, very solid just from watching them in scrims and things like that, as well as just French people always are very good at trios. Then final EU player we've got is Rescard, Sky and Scroll right here. I'm going to put those guys into top 10 as well. I definitely think, I mean, they won a cash cup recently. They could actually get top 5 hypothetically, but they're landing at that like you know, that rainbow split down at the bottom. It's just not the best spot, which is why I can't really rank them any higher. And obviously we've already got some insane names on you that are sort of beating them out. And then finally, we've got NPen. I'm going to put NPen into top 10 as well. He's playing with Death and Byler. Those guys just seem pretty solid. Not the best placement so far, but they seem very, very solid in so many requests that I put them in. So I'm going to put them into top 10 as well. There is a bunch of players that I would just whack into the lucky to make grands, but I feel like they're going to get very, very annoyed at me. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Have I missed anyone, or have I got this ranking at the top very, very wrong? So just to recap, on NA, I've got Epicwell winning on West, and then I've got Bolts, Rapid, and Poyo winning, Peterbots Trio and Canada Show getting top 3, and then Clicks and Muzz, and then Booga and Reet getting top 5, which I think is a fairly like standard list, but a little bit controversial putting these guys at the very, very top. And then on you, I've got Veno winning, I've got Cammy and Teeny's trios getting into the top 3, and then Reason and then Queasy and his new trio getting into the top 5. I might have this completely wrong, and I never normally do this sort of tier list where I'm just guessing how good people will do, because it is quite hard to do. There's a lot of time before FNCS will start, but just from what I've seen, we've had like a month of trio cups. I've watched all of these guys play. I'm going to go ahead and lock in this list, and let me know what you guys think in the comments down below.